Let me just look really quick that which one that was. I listened to that one, so let me see what that was.
It was lecture 17, and it was,
Yeah.
so in the beginning, he speaks about the causes and so on, but he gets onto teleology and teleology for inanimate matter. And then later on, when it gets esoteric, is when it gets to the prime mover, and he talks about it being like an eternal, existent, unmoved, and immutable. And then that's when I was like, I didn't enjoy that as much.
Yeah, I don't really get that either. I mean, it is weird about Aristotle, and that is maybe the weirdest thing about him of all.
Right.
And I wouldn't even call it Platonic necessarily, but it's very strange. And I don't have any comment on it yet until I actually read that. But everything before that, I think, is very helpful. I mean, that's like the one thing in Aristotle that
I see
about the prime mover that seems very odd. Like, it's not that it's necessarily a sentient thing, but it's the prime mover that establishes everything moving. It's very odd.
It's odd also because he takes over from the astrologers of the time and talks about like empty spheres with intelligence, and then that's when I'm kind of
but even Peacock said that you don't necessarily need to interpret Aristotle that way, and he said this is the standard interpretation of Aristotle. It doesn't mean that it's the only valid one. It's just the standard one.
Right.
And yes, it is very standard that this is what Aristotle thought. The very standard interpretation.
Yeah, for what it's worth, he did say that, you can, the criticism is that you don't, how do you explain motion is an illegitimate question. And so you can regard motion as just an irreducible primary. But if you do attempt to explain motion, then Aristotle's answer is a logical one. So he's begun with the premise that you need to explain motion, and that's maybe where he made a mistake in the standard interpretation. But still, it was a bit of I didn't enjoy that one as much. So okay. When you say,
it is the teleology part. As far as the teleology, though, it is most useful in relation to biology and living organisms, and even things that act naturally, because it explains things like evolution almost implicitly, that things go towards something, that they exist and live out their nature. By living out their nature, they always go to some end. I mean, any action goes towards some direction. It will have to complete eventually. Like, the life of an organism is like a birth to death, and that completes their existence, completes their nature. And in that sense, like, things go towards an end. Even like a falling rock, by its nature, will fall and meet the end of its process. And that's what teleology really is, that thinking in terms of a process, that there's a start and there's an end, and it completes. And the completion is thought of as the final cause.
Right.
So what would constitute completing its nature, completing its full nature and actions? Like, in the sense of humans, like, living out your nature as a person is your final cause. Your life is your reason for even existing, that everything goes towards the process of living, and your process ends when you stop living.
Right. Yeah, I could see there was a basis for some of what was discussed, like he was talking about everything. He believed in the four elements. He took them over from the scientists of the time. So I assume they're atomists, like you mentioned this last time, earth, water, air, fire. And you can see a lot, like there's some logic to it. Like, he thinks everything tries to reach its final place. For water, that's near the earth. So when you turn a bucket of water, it goes to the earth because that's its final cause. And that like, it's a stretch, but you can see it, the logic in it. Or fire goes to the heavens, and so on.
Yeah, I think it's sensible enough based on what you can observe without microscopes.
And but he did give an objection to this idea of final cause, which was he said something like, so living entities, they're constituted in a particular way. They have a nature so that no matter what happens within a certain range, there's they necessarily react in a pro-life manner. So from the outside, it looks like they're pursuing a goal, but in actuality, it's not a final cause. It's simply an efficient cause on the nature of the entity itself. For example, he described a thermostat being structured so that whatever forces act upon it within a certain range, it reacts to produce a certain temperature. And you might say, oh, well, the thermostat is pursuing a certain end, but in reality, it's just the laws of nature. It's just the laws of its nature when acted upon to do that.
Yeah, but
And
that's what the final cause is. It, by its nature, it goes towards some end. I mean, it can't be acting unless it's going somewhere. It doesn't just act in without isolation or in isolation to what it will do in the future. I mean, it's gotta, by its nature, continue its actions, and it stops at some point, or you say that it completes its action at some point. It doesn't have to be purposeful as long as it goes somewhere. For, I think the literal translation isn't that it accomplished its goal, but I don't remember the translation, but it's not literally saying that it, like, what got out what it sought. It doesn't need to seek anything.
isn't it enough though to just use like material, formal, and efficient, given that criticism where, it's the efficient cause is the agent acting upon the form, and the form has a certain nature. So in any given circumstance, it'll react in a certain way. And so that there's no need for the final cause with that criticism, which I can't reply to that. That makes sense to me.
I think it would reduce any action to something much too narrow. Like, you can't just talk about the more immediate narrow things when, like, say, in the life of an animal, you can't just, or let's take inanimate things, like in the process of, say, how diamonds are formed.
Yeah.
You don't just take one moment and say that the process is when a rock is squished hard in one moment. It's not just a series of moments, but it's important to talk about in the context of its entire process, of all the process at once. Or like, what would constitute a process, the thing? What constitutes a span of where it stays itself, that it changes in many ways, but doesn't changes essential nature. And that's kind of important, I think, to recognize. Okay. When the rock is no longer a rock, when does it become magma? I mean, at some point it becomes magma and not a diamond anymore. Or at some point it was not a diamond, it was just a piece of coal. And it helps you distinguish when something has changed into a different type of entity. It can help you with that.
I'm still not clear on it, but I was intending to review it and then put together more thought out questions for you. So when I've done that, we can come back to, we'll do that on the Zoom.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. So
your questions.
Yeah, I read the methods of examining a philosopher's ideas, and you said the first step is to recognize that you're relatively ignorant of that philosopher. What does that mean? Like, isn't that generally what you think when you read a philosopher? Like, so what is the emphasis on the ignorance?
I just mentioned that in the sense that you don't need to worry that you're supposed to understand something, or that should be clear, or that you'll actually get it really fast. And I think it might be a mistake people might have, that they ought to understand better, or if they're not getting it, it's their fault. But it's not really your fault. It's just that you lack some knowledge. It's not that you're not thinking hard enough, but that you just don't know enough yet. And that's quite okay.
I see. Okay. So you think it's a common mistake to approach a subject, or we could generalize this, right? To approach a subject, in this case, philosophy, and you don't understand what is being said, and you think it's because you're not able to comprehend it. Whereas the actual cause of the difficulty is that there is context and knowledge that you do not have, that is not letting you understand this specific thing. Is that
right?
Okay.
There's not something you did wrong. It's not like, oh, you're dumb, or you're reasoning badly, or you can't think logically. It's not that. That's what I'm saying.
I got it. I understand it. Yeah, that's good. And you've had that experience frequently where you like approach something and you're initially completely baffled, and then later on it just gels.
Sometimes it's more that I've seen it in others, I think.
Yeah.
I think I've learned how to not do it anymore. I don't think I do it anymore, but I think I used to, but I'm not sure.
I think I still do that. So can you give me an example that if do you have one in mind of like a time where you had that experience or you know someone else did, and what was it like? What was it?
The first time I read Nietzsche was probably like that. It's like what the hell is this? Doesn't make sense.
That's me reading Nietzsche.
Yeah. There was another book I think of. Oh, what's a book that I like now that I hated at first? Probably a TV show that at first I hated. Then I tried it again. It's like my favorite. I forget which show it was, but it happens in art sometimes. Like,
right.
It doesn't make any sense, but then I try it years later. And it's like, I love it.
Right. That's interesting. I haven't yet had that experience, so it's pretty cool. Like maybe I'll have that experience with the Greek plays, because I've tried to read the Odyssey and I hated it.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
And maybe I think I'll have that with Nietzsche now that I'm doing all this to get context. So
yeah.
Okay. All right, this part about asking, so it's good to ask an expert a question. I agree with that. That's always my preferred method. And usually get an answer in a linear way. That is, they will provide reasons and examples particular to your question. The problem is they can't provide more lateral thinking that let you make connections with other ideas that seem unrelated or tangential. Could you maybe elaborate on this a bit? I wasn't fully clear on, yeah.
Well, in the process of discovering your own answers, it's a lot more exploratory, that you find things that you may have not even known to ask, that there are things you didn't even know you didn't know. There are things that the expert may not even bother telling you because it's actually not relevant to the answer. But in your exploration, you find distantly connected things, which might help with your spiral theory of knowledge to bring in things that are unique to you that you know, or unique to your interests, or questions that are related from afar that you might bring in. It's more like it's an additional element that you can use. I mean, that straight answer, direct answer can be useful, but it's also good to have that exploration of your own.
I got it. Okay. So an example might be, I'm trying to make something up. Let's say I have a question about weighing values and like how to rank them. And I can't find anything on it. But then I read Nietzsche and he helps me in some tangential way think about that problem better. I'm making this up, so I don't know if you have an actual real world example, but that would be an example of what you're talking about, right?
Not quite. I mean,
okay.
Say I wanted to know about something about quantum physics. So I go to a physics professor and ask him, and he tells me all the things I need to know about that topic. He tells me the proofs and shows me a book or two about that. But I mean, that's helpful and great. But there's also the consideration that I can look for the answer myself entirely also. And when I do that, I might not find things that the expert would even bother mentioning because it's actually irrelevant. But in your exploration, you'll accidentally stumble across things and make kind of spontaneous connections, things like that.
So it is relevant, but it's not like, maybe we'll say directly relevant. That's what you mean.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I mean by lateral, though. Like it goes other directions rather than straight at the answer.
Yeah.
It brings in other information that helps your spiral theory of knowledge, like the spiral knowledge, because you bring in other things that help consolidate things better. It's more of an aid rather than simply the answer. Like the expert gives you the answer, but it doesn't necessarily set the context or set more background knowledge to really solidify your understanding. And the
Right.
tangential stuff can bring in outside connections that help.
Okay. I haven't yet experienced, can't recall experiencing that yet. Maybe reading something, but then getting onto unrelated questions, but I can't recall yet.
Okay.
That. All right. Next, extract terms from your questions. This is being precise in the concepts like Feynman, right? What are the words of the questions? What do they mean? What do they refer to? Clarifying all of that. Okay.
Yes. Or at least listing the important terms.
Yeah.
At the very least, you list things.
Okay.
And then you know what to do next. You investigate those things.
An example might be, I want to rank values, but I haven't yet clarified what exactly I mean by value. Is it an emotion? Is it, and so on? That might be an example, right?
Yeah, and what is ranking?
Right.
Even what do you mean by rank? Things like that.
Right. Okay. Okay, so this is my question here about when I'm researching something like terms, at least for me, it feels like, it does feel like I'm going to Borges's Library of Babel and I'm like jumping down the stairwell, and then there's like infinite things. So how do you, like Wikipedia especially, it's just, there's so much there. So how do you've got one term, you look up value, for example, and then it will list like tons of things.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the question exactly. Do you mind? We could use what is Platonism to continue with that example.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you could, if for that term, it's actually, let's see, what would you do?
So we could like Wikipedia Plato, but then there's so much.
And you could go to this theory of forms, because that's only so long. Right. And you might be able to find, oh, where did he get the idea? I mean, I can find actually which dialogue it's talked about specifically.
You know what I might do is, when I'm practicing this, rather than spend ages when I'm stuck, I'll just go, here's where I'm up to in researching something, but I've stuck, and then we can discuss that live, right?
Yeah, that's one useful tool for like writing out a methodology like this. You can say where you got stuck.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. Cool. And then highlighting the relevant, what did you mean by, okay, so I've looked something up on Wikipedia for a philosopher or whoever, and it's given me an overview and it highlights the relevant aspects of the question.
It could be tricky, but that's why you have the other terms, I think. Where like, well, if you're trying to look at like, what is the idea, what is more context on Plato's theory of forms you want to go to, anything that related to epistemology, say, which I know the Wikipedia article actually has specifically one on forms or universals and forms. So you would know to go to that because that is your question, or that would be your question. So you click that, and it does tell you like,
I get it. I get what you mean.
That at least.
Okay, I understand. So basically, whatever the term is in my question, see if I can match it to the thing I'm researching. So it's like there's an index in the library.
Right.
Got it.
It's your way to search the library. It's your index, you're right.
Yep. During your research, which ideas could parallel each other and be used as a way to look at the problem another way?
I mean, for example, the other day I used an example of chopping down trees as an analogy with how consciousness works. I mean, that might sound very esoteric. So, see if you're thinking about, trying to think of an example.
So analogies, look for analogies.
Yeah, that you can think of, because they can help clarify your thinking or connect things together.
Oh, I see. So it's like you're basically saying, try and make integrations, whether that's analogies or identify relationships to other ideas you already hold. So for example, it might be, I don't know if this is a good example, but I'll say it, you read about some theory of how when musicians become more commercial, the quality of their music decreases, and then you try and relate that to Plato's idea of the ranking of different careers, something like that, right? That's the kind of integration you need.
Perhaps, yeah, because
Yeah.
it's not actually the same concept,
Yeah.
but they're related enough that you see, imagine the structure of the question or the answer, like in the way that like careers might match something else of values.
Yeah.
Or you might say that computers operate like humans, but
Yeah.
like Feynman was talking about, but we also know they're not the same because do all this analysis, but keeping in the context that it's an analogy can help to use that thinking sometimes.
Okay. Got it.
Rotate was just a different way to say, look at it a different way. I was imagining like a Rubik's Cube, like you turn the problem around in your hands.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, so like basically try and make integrations, identify analogies that gives you like different perspectives on the problem. So if I want to, let's say I'm thinking of this Musashi story, and there's the story of the hemp seed and the kid who trains using a hemp seed that slowly grows day by day. That's like a kind of analogy you can use for incremental self-improvement, where every day it's not just maintenance, but it's a little tiny improvement, like a spurt of growth every day. So that's like just a different way to look at it. That's what you mean, right? That's just an analogical example, but
yes.
Okay, got it. Cool. I understand.
Yeah, analogies being just, it's not supposed to be an exact match. The analogy only goes so far. I mean, it breaks down eventually, but it helps.
This is where I was a little less clear. So like, okay, let's say I'm trying to figure out why a philosopher says something. What does it mean to alter a premise so that he makes sense? Does that mean like go back to his basic premises and try and change them, or?
Yes, that's what I meant, which is a bit creative in a way that you are changing their ideas, but, or at least alter one of your premises is what I was saying. Okay. So that you can understand from there. Like you might know it violates the law of, or some truth of, but you go with it anyways. Like, okay, knowing that this is false, if I made it true, would they make sense? Because then if you made it true, then maybe you identify this is where they go wrong, or this is the essential difference from you, or why it seems right to them but different to you because of that one recognition, for example.
Okay, I get it. It's one of those things where I'll need to practice it, and then it will become clearer as well. Yeah, because I haven't done that yet.
That's more of a creative thing, like the art of coming up with more nuanced interpretations of a philosopher.
And then to stack on absurdities, does that mean try and find the implications of someone's view and keep going?
It would be similar, but if you could just be creative about just keep adding things as long as their premises are consistent. If you want, like as far as you want, like we were talking about like projections for the Plato, and it's like we kept building on it as we talked about it more. And it also sounded more and more absurd as it went. So yeah, in a way it is the logical implications of what the thinker is saying, even beyond what the philosopher even believed. So despite like maybe the philosopher didn't even realize those implications, but that's what it means to understand him even more fully, see what he believes, and even take those further and see what do those beliefs imply, what do they entail.
Okay, I see. So with Aristotle, that might be something like, what is the fact that he thinks essences are in the entity imply? I guess you get an answer to that in the lectures, but that might be an example, right? You try and identify what does this imply if the essence
Yeah.
of everything is in it? That, and then
Yeah.
you keep, okay, got it. Cool. That's good. I'm going to share this other screen now. Okay. Let me get rid of these later. When you read a large essay and there's tons and tons of material, I experienced this, by the way, when I read the article on organizing and visualizing concepts by the one you sent me on by Kvashnik.
Yeah.
When you read a large essay and there's so much material, how do you it seems like if you want to find the essence of an article, you have to retain everything, right? Like how do you, especially when, let's say it's 30 pages, and how do you like step back and go, okay, here are the different components, here is the essence, when there's like tons of things in it? Does the question make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Well, I think first, of course, is why are you reading it? That's always the first question.
Okay.
I mean, there's could be many reasons you're reading this essay. It could be a review. It could be you're looking for clarification on a particular concept, or it could be an introduction to some ideas. It really depends. So,
yeah.
say if you're going for an introduction, you just want to get some general concepts. You don't need the nuances. You just need, maybe somebody says, they say what's important to remember, or they mention a concept repeatedly, so you can note this one concept.
Okay.
And you could just pick those out. I mean, because that's something that's been used and has been useful. Another could be insights that were very clear to you in an individual sentence that itself was very revealing and was very clear, and one that especially stood out among others. I mean, not just everything that was insightful, but one that you could repeat and you could almost extract everything else about the essay, or at least extract what the point is. You might not know what the point is, so some of that could just be, what are they talking about? What's the subject matter that they mention? Like, are they talking about something a lot? Like, are they mentioning something about a person a lot? Are they mentioning an event a lot, or some concept a lot?
Okay.
Because that would tell you what's relevant.
So the frequency with which they refer to a certain idea, and then
within essays, yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, and then do you ever summarize sections of it, and then try and from those summaries, then you extract like, okay, this seems important. That's how you work out what.
If I want to spend a lot of time on the essay, like if my goal is to understand a particular thing about this person, like it's not just a general investigation, but a thorough investigation, then I might summarize sections, like one sentence per paragraph, perhaps, or one sentence per page.
Right.
Because then you can force yourself to find the essential or essentialize it.
Yeah.
Like one sentence per page for 30-page essay, 30 sentences. Not that bad, really, if you're trying to summarize.
Okay, I see why you mentioned purpose first, because maybe you're not approaching it to analyze the whole essay, but just to extract a particular part of it that's relevant to your question. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've done that before. Like one time I read like an essay, just say I was rereading Objectivist Ethics again.
Yeah.
But just to extract things about what's relevant to free will, which there were sections that a lot, but the entire essay was relevant, but some pages like only had like a sentence. Others were like the entire page.
Right. Okay, I got it. Have you ever done, do you know the book Readings for Logical Analysis?
No.
No, it's by Stephen Hicks. And I think he used it in a critical thinking course, and basically it's just all kinds of newspaper editorials, and then it follows up with questions like, see if I can find you an example. Stokes mentions that she is a member of Amnesty International. What role does this play in her argument? So it's based, I guess it's comprehension, but then also identifying logical fallacies and that kind of thing. Have you ever done anything like that in a course, or where you're given these articles and you're supposed to like find logical fallacies, you know, apply what you've learned about logic and definitions and that kind of thing?
I haven't, but that sounds very good. If I had a logic class, I would want an exercise like that.
Okay.
Or a critical thinking class. That would be actually very good. I mean, just practice doing it always helps. And I think that's a good way to get essentials too. Like I would even do that for anything that's essentially what you do. If you want to critically analyze anything, have those questions in mind.
Okay. Maybe we can throw something like that, like a really short article, like an editorial, and then try and apply everything from Aristotle and logic and definition, you know, principles of definition and so on to that. All right. By the way, just curious, do you see any difference between, let's say, logical thinking and critical thinking? Because I often hear critical thinking thrown around, like, oh yeah, I went to university, I learned critical thinking. I'm like, well, do you need, anyway, do you see any difference between just asking questions?
In different ways. Like sometimes, I mean, logic is just deductive, logical, formal logic.
Right.
Nothing but like informal, but sometimes I just mean, by logical, I just mean sensible and rational.
Yeah.
But generally, if I want to be precise, critical thinking is more broad. It's just the genus, and because it's just the thinking of trying to think intelligently and rationally. But logical usually is more narrow about deductions and formal relationships and things like that.
Okay. Would you say the essential then for critical thinking is asking questions about content? That's very broad, but I have nothing else on it.
Questions. I think it's a big part of it. I don't know if it's the most important. It's as much as being reflective. I guess being reflective is questioning in a way. Yeah. But it can also be reaffirming. It's not necessarily a question, but it depends on the question. Like, are you trying to confirm something? Are you trying to understand something? Or validate? I mean, those questions are all different. If you need to learn something new, I think questions. If you need to validate, I think maybe, I don't know what word to use. Being perceptive, as in like noting distinctions is important for validating things, which isn't strictly speaking a question. That's what I mean. Okay. Right, like identifying implied premises. Yeah, or splitting up genus differentia. Yeah. Keep splitting it up. I mean, those aren't questions, but that's great for being clear in your thoughts, being critical of what people are talking about. Okay, I got a definition, or not a definition, but I got a description here. I've just Googled that makes sense to me, which is, where'd it go? Okay, it is a process of deliberate, systematic, and logical thinking of any subject. And I'm concerned specifically with systematic. So it's like a process you have in place to that you can apply on different articles and different subjects, where you might, you know, you have a process and a structure, like, okay, identify hidden premises, identify current premises, define key terms, whatever. Like there's some kind of recipe you've got where you follow, something like that. Okay, there should be, yes. Then it's clear, yeah. Yeah. That is clear, yes. As opposed to an ad hoc, every time it's different sort of thing. Yes. Universals versus concepts, basically the same, right? In the ancient Greek context, because when Aristotle was speaking, he was speaking about universals and particulars, but what he means is actually concepts, or in modern terms. At least Aristotle does. Plato doesn't really. He needs more something. really, really there. But Aristotle is more like it is something abstract, and it's something that's always true, which is basically what Rand means by a concept.
Yeah.
Because it's something that's always true in all contexts, past and present and future.
The atomists, I was learning about the atomists, and they wanted to get out of, they saw that Empedocles, who came up with Empedocles came up with the four elements underlying everything, and change just being this mixing and remixing of elements. And then you get from fire, earth, water, air, you might get bananas or you might get cigarettes. But then the problem with that was that you still violate Parmenides' principle. Like you still get banana from fire and air, but banana wasn't there before. So it is and it isn't, and it isn't and it is. And then you still violate it. And then so that they try to correct his view. And they also wanted to get out of Anaxagoras' position of saying you just have an irreducible multiplicity. And the way they did that was saying you can allow locomotion is a form of change that doesn't violate Parmenides' principle, because it's just one thing moving from one place to another, right? Do you remember that?
Yes, kind of. I'm not very knowledgeable about that, but that does even like similar to what Aristotle has responded to in things I've read in Aristotle. Like he seems to be he talks about that a lot. That the idea that, motion is from point A to point B is what makes it all okay. But Aristotle's like, no, it's not. It doesn't fix it.
Yeah, because I was thinking about that, and I was thinking like, well, isn't it still a violation? Because you could say, if I'm using their language and their line of thought, you could say, well, the banana is on the table, and then when the banana gets moved into the mouth, the banana is in the mouth. And it's like, it is on the table and it isn't on the table. It is in the mouth and it isn't on the mouth, in the mouth. And it's like that same line of thinking that they used for everything else to say it was a violation of Parmenides' principle. You could, as far as I'm understanding it, you could just as well apply it to motion anyway.
Yeah, I mean, motion doesn't, from the 2 points, isn't sufficient to explain.
Right. Okay.
I mean, it does explain a change, that the thing is still there, but it still doesn't explain why. I mean, the banana is still, why does it become no longer a banana? I mean, you know why it's still a banana, because it just went to a new place. But then why did it still change anyway? It became mush in your stomach. Like, why that happened? Just now the banana is not banana.
Right. Do you know why Parmenides concluded everything was one solidly packed thing? Like, how does that derive from his basic principle that there isn't nothing, or, he denies nothing? Like, is it because he's saying that if change implies contradiction, so therefore there's no change, and if there's no change, it means you can't have different things? Is that sort of is that sort of where he got it? You can't have different things, so therefore everything must be one thing.
It seems to be. Yeah. That seems the best way to interpret it, that any effort to say that there is change is some sort of illusion or something deceptive.
Yeah.
Or contrary about our perception.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It probably derives from like skepticism of the senses, I would bet.
Yeah, it does. As in, I know that he was skeptical of the senses too, because so was Heraclitus.
Yeah, so it's just like, it's just an illusion that things are changing when they really are just one and singular, that universally everything is the same, despite our perception otherwise.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to Plato. You may not know this, and we can skip it because these are, and this is why I was going to put a pause, because there are probably questions I need to do some more investigation about.
Okay, I'll let you know which ones.
Yeah, but the first one is, we can also go to, I don't think I've only got Plato. I think I've got Aristotle here. So maybe we'll go to Aristotle first.
Let me see the Plato ones too. Let me just see the topics.
The world of forms.
Yeah, that's the next one.
It's his epistemology and him answering the sophists.
Not very good about that.
Okay.
Reminiscence. I read the Phaedo, so I might know about the reminiscence one. But Aristotle, definitely know.
Do you want to try this world of forms one?
Let's see. Let me read it. No, it's too specific for me.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
I think getting Aristotle on that one, that particular question would clarify the question going backwards.
Sorry, say that again. Aristotle.
See, Plato. Yeah, Aristotle responds to that question. Why is this a problem? Mystical insight.
At least in Plato's own terms, I was like, well, he's saying that you need to validate all the premises of the basic sciences by reaching the ultimate form of the good. And then from that, you deduce everything. But I was thinking like, well, if he's saying you reach the individual forms through communing with the world of forms anyway, why do you need to, isn't it grasped by mystical insight anyway? So like what's the problem here of like you need to validate it by reaching the ultimate form of the good?
Then you already knew the knowledge. It's a question of, are you acquiring knowledge or did you always have it? It's a problem. You can't quite confirm that you really are just remembering things, I think. Because if you're just remembering things, yeah, you had the knowledge. It's nothing to do with having the knowledge to begin with. Or you either have the knowledge or you're trying to create the knowledge, and something about a contradiction there that you can't have. I forget what it is. I should move on about that. I don't remember.
Maybe if I wanted to try and apply your method, I would say, I don't know if this is true, I'm just trying to be creative. To apply your method, I would say something like, well, Plato would tell me it's true that you commune with the world of forms to grasp individual forms, so the basic axioms of the sciences, but it's imperfect because you've just received a stimulus, you don't know how accurate it is, like it's sort of close but not exactly close. It's only when you reach only when you exit the cave and you see the sun have you 100% confirmed that your knowledge is true. Something like that. Maybe that would be my answer.
It comes from the Meno, the dialogue, the Meno or Meno or something. I know the section in Aristotle that talks about this actually. I just need to look it up. I don't like exactly the way Peikoff analyzed the cave. I mean, it's not about the world of forms. It's just that anytime you come to learn something, that's all the outside is.
What do you mean?
When the person in the cave analogy, it's not somebody coming to the contact of the world of forms. It's just some person coming into contact with better wisdom and knowledge. And that coming to that knowledge implies some ethical obligation to the people down below that you must bring that knowledge back to them, that your awareness, that's this new knowledge of the truth, which even could be like objectivism, say. It's not about the forms. But
for what it's worth, I did find an analogy elsewhere of relating his allegory of the cave to the world of forms, like putting it on a ladder, like a divided line, and then comparing it to his divided line theory of knowledge in parallel to the allegory of the cave. And that was not in an objectivist context. So someone else has made that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're usually wrong.
Yeah, okay.
But we'll move on from that. That's just a side point.
Yep.
Universals. Yep.
Yeah, so he says you can never have, this is when he talks about this matter-form distinction. And he says you can never have matter without form or form without matter. And I'm like, okay, well, form without matter makes sense because it's a universalizing element in a thing. So it's one element out of many, but why couldn't you have matter without form? like just some single unique thing that is not any kind of thing? Is that this is the same
I mean, this
question
is
as
just
yeah.
a distinction of things. It's not that these things are actually separate. The form and matter is always together. It's inseparable. They are the same thing. It's just identifying conceptually a different distinction within them. It's something about them differently. I mean, that's all it really is. It's not. He's not saying that there is a form that you find and that it can exist independently, or that matter can exist independently. It's just that you got to think what it can do, and you got to think what it does do. That's really about all it is. Nothing more than that.
It's the same question I have about why can't there be more than one fundamental, because he's saying, I get it, that he's not saying that form can, he's saying form can't exist independent of matter. Like in everything there is matter and form, and the form is the universalizing element. But I understand, you can see that around you there are things and they're of a certain kind of class. But is he also, this is the same question about the fundamentals that I still have.
I think Aristotle would say there's more than one. I'm quite sure.
But then also, like, can't you have how would he justify having everything must have every matter must have a form? Like, couldn't you just have some individual unique matter that had no form element or formal element, if you want to call it that, just a thing made of matter, which is not a particular is a particular thing, but it's not a kind of thing? Like, how does he
because it would be, well, unreal. I mean, for one, I mean, why would he say it's unreal? Because it's just potency. It's just what a thing can do. That's all it is. It's not the thing itself. It's just what it can do. What the thing itself is called the substance. And the substance has a matter and a form.
Okay. But is it is he making a generalization here? He's seeing all these things that you can categorize, and he's saying each thing, each substance has matter and form. But I'm saying, like, it's a generalization, right? Because you could have a thing, using his thinking, you could, like, I don't see why you can't say there may be something which is just all matter, but we can't name it because it's so unique and there's nothing else like it.
Well, I think it would contradict that things have a determinate nature, because they wouldn't be acting. It'd be pure potential, pure potency. It's that it could act but it never does act, which is contradictory to what a thing is, because what a thing is what it does. So if it's not doing anything, it can't exist by nature. It has no existence if it can't act. That's what Aristotle would say.
If it can
act, to be is to act. If it can't act, it can't be.
But so if a thing didn't have form, then it couldn't act?
Yeah. There would be no way it could act, because matter is just potency. That's what he means. What Aristotle means. It's just what it can do.
Yeah.
Its capability of acting. The form is
the structure.
Complicated to translate, but it's more like the way it acts in a way that's universal, that makes the matter what it is. Okay. What the matter does when it acts. Something like that, which is more or less conceptual, because it's not literally what it is doing. It's a weird translation, weird way to think, but the form is kind of like a concept, and it's kind of what makes it do what it does. Like, it is the acting of the behavior and the consistent action of the entity of the substance. Okay. And the matter is just like, oh, rocks can fall. It's a potency. It's part of their matter, but it's not their form. It does not what makes a rock a rock. It's not the actions of a rock that make it a rock. Like, what makes a rock is particular things that rocks do.
Right. All right, I will need to revisit this. He said in the lecture, For Aristotle, knowledge is looking out to discover the facts of the world, not introspecting, not reasoning from constructs. Do you see any distinction between constructs and, because I've seen Scott Powell use it in his history, some article he wrote about history, and I didn't quite get, like, is it different? A construct is like a construct, just not a concept?
I don't know what he means. I don't know what he means by construct.
Yeah, maybe he did mean concept, but he just used a different word for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I quite like Aristotle's theory of explanation. So it's very, and he says that a man who keeps asking why is in want of education. And I like that a lot. And I was thinking about the nature, like explaining mortality. So in Aristotle's theory of explanation, you begin with all living things are mortal. Mortality is caused by their nature, which is their living. But then that's like, that would be considered the first low resolution answer, right? Like eventually, assuming we discover, like we will keep zooming in and discover more and more causes until we get to some final, maybe some final cause that's discovered by science. And then at that point, like all of those are theories of explanation, right? It's just, there's different resolutions. Is that a way to think about it?
Those would be efficient causes. It sounds like you're talking about. Explain because it's in particular.
Yeah, would I be right to say, like for now, you can say using Aristotle's theory of explanation, you've got layers. So an explanation at a current stage of development might be like mortality is caused by the fact that a thing lives or something like that.
By theory of explanation, do you mean the four causes?
No. I mean, to Aristotle's theory of explanation is that explanation consistent. Maybe my wording, this is my wording, theory of explanation. I don't know what he called it, but what to him, Aristotle, explanation means seeing particular events as an instance of a general principle. That is what an explanation is. And the general principle relates the nature of some class to its mode of action, meaning the law of cause and effect. And so applying that to mortality, for example, might be like, well, all living beings are mortal. Man is mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. And so you've explained Socrates' mortality by reference to him being a living being, the general principle being that living beings are mortal. But if you want to explain mortality, is it a case of like layers of explanation? So all of that is an explanation, considered an explanation of Aristotle. But would you say, like, is that you've explained mortality, but is it right to say you can just keep explaining more and more of it in layers until you get to some final, I don't know, mortality is caused by Lala cells. And then you're like, okay, well, it's mortality is Lala cells. That's the like highest resolution answer.
There would be multiple answers. I'm trying to think how best to answer this. Wait, so when Aristotle talks about an explanation, he's just talking about causes, like why is something what it is? Why does something act the way it does? That's what his causes and explanations are. It's just to explain why it is what it is, why it does what it does. That's almost literally the translation, like why it is what it is. And it would be in reference to like, well, something bumped into it or something made it or something, which is a material cause. But I mean, ultimately, it is the four causes that are part of explanation, that you have to see what a thing is and divide it in different questions and identify the thing, divide it among questions. Those questions usually be something to do with the causes, and see which ones apply. And you have to answer each of those. And in one sense, yes, there's different levels of resolution, but there are different kinds of answers. We could go to a narrow resolution as far as, say, proximate causes with efficient causes, like what made the criminal murder his girlfriend. I mean, that could be like, well, there's many causes for that. one is just like, of course, the muscles in his body moved a certain way. Another
Right.
could be in reference to people, final cause because he was angry that she cheated on him. And that could be a reason, which isn't the same kind as saying that the muscles made his arm move to shoot a gun. Or you might say that why did he kill her? What explains her killing? Well, they fired a gun at her, which is different than both the efficient cause being like, oh, she cheated on him, or like that's what made him want to do it, or the muscles made him do it. And so it's distinguished. Say the gun did it.
Where I'm confused though then is I could use that example as well. Like, okay, his motivation was his girlfriend cheated on him, but then you could keep going. You could say, well, why did, so he killed his girlfriend because she cheated on him. Why did he decide that killing his girlfriend because she cheated on him was a good idea? And then so on. You could just like keep going. You know what I'm saying? Like in layers.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
what is all of that just considered one explanation, and that we just whatever resolution we're at is the explanation? Like, you see what I did here with the mortality is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is fair to break it up like that. And I think you can't say there's proximate and distal elements of that, or proximate and distal types of final or efficient causes, or there's different final causes. Like there's different reasons he did it. But the key is that I'm saying that there's different kinds of explanations. I mean, it's a different kind to say the gun did it, and it's different kind to say because he wanted to exact punishment.
Yeah.
What's his motivation? I mean, they're different kinds of things.
Yeah.
And they might have different levels to narrow down on it, but they're different kinds regardless. But you need both to explain why this thing happened. If you were a detective, you can't just stick with just one of these things. You have to look at the whole picture.
Right.
The motivations, what pushed him to do it, and by what means did he do it? What were his materials that allowed it to happen? Like guns, bullets, whatever. The car, the getaway vehicle, blah, blah, blah.